Right. The other thing about my father was that he sang in the choir. And of course, this was my mother's idea. She did not like him to sing in the choir, in spite of his beautiful voice. He had a tenor. He was a tenor. And he enjoyed music very much, and he really wanted to do it. But she had all these little kids, and the women with the small children when it was customary for them to sit in the back, the very last row behind the last row of seats, so they had to sit on chairs. So they pushed these chairs together real tight, and so that our family could, and maybe others too, but she was stuck there with those little kids, and she didn't like it for him to go up and sit by himself in the choir while she was with all those little kids. So she kind of pushed for him to come and sit with her, and he did that. He would do it, and so he didn't continue his choir singing. But every winter uh, we just had one thing right after another. You would know that when somebody brought home chicken pox or measles or sore throat, everybody was going to get it, and that we did. Now, my mother had little certain things that she would use. One of the things, if you had a fever, you got a hot whiskey sling. Well, and it was a shot of whiskey. Well, she didn't give us a full shot, but it was pretty bad, I thought. And put a little sugar in it and hot water, and you had to drink that. And that would make you, oh, it would make you sweat. And that was supposed to take the germs away and sweat out of you. And then the other thing is if you had an earache, she puts warm sweet oil in. Now, sweet oil she bought from the Watkins man. I don't know what it was. She just called it sweet oil, and that's what it said on the bottle. But that's what they used. And also, there was a lot of people had boils at that time, and I don't know what caused that. It's some sort of an infection, and you'd have them on your arm or your hand or something, and they'd put a poultice on that. They called it a poultice, and it was made from flaxseed. You boiled flaxseed, put it in a piece of cloth and when it was warm, and put it on that boil, and it would draw it to the surface, draw the infection. Then they would sterilize a needle and open it and take the infection out, let it drain. It wasn't very pleasant. And the other thing we had was croup. And that seemed to be passed down in our family, and it still is. Even in my grandchildren, they all have croup. So I think it's a hereditary thing. When they get a cold, it settles in the chest, and they sound almost like a dog, a hound, a breed of hound, when they have it. And I didn't know until my children were grown that actually it's very dangerous, that children can die having croup. And I didn't know that. It was a good thing I didn't know it, because I'd have worried myself sick. But my mother was, she had, in spite of her being harsh, perhaps, and very sharp of nature and sharp of tongue, she had a very generous nature. In 1929, during the Depression years, several of her sisters and their husbands didn't have work, and there was a crash, and people didn't have money, and they didn't have work. So they would come, if they had gas, they'd drive out to the farm. And she always had, take them to the garden before they left. She'd give them all sorts, any vegetables we had, she gave them a lot of that. She would share whatever uh, smoked ham or smoked meat, whatever we had, she'd share with them. And I remember them saying, "Oh, you've got a big family, you better keep that for yourself." But she wanted to make sure that everybody had enough to eat. And and that was one thing about growing up on a farm that was very positive. We never were hungry. It wasn't gourmet, probably the finest food, but we always had milk to drink and food to eat, and we were relatively healthy people, I think. That was about it.
Tell me what Uncle Lawrence was like. Lawrence, your brother Lawrence was like. What was his personality like?
Oh, well, my mother and father always said that he had quite a temper. And I remember when he was like 13, 14 years, and 15 years old, he and my dad would get in some pretty hot conversations and confrontations. And that's how he happened to go going on the Great Lakes. He wanted to get out from under the farm and all of that. He'd get out on his own. And there was a man in town who he was captain on a ship. So I don't know how he heard about him, through some of his friends probably. And he went to see him, said he would like to try that. And that man hired him anyway, and he was young when he left. I think he was barely 16 when he left the first time. And he went a couple of years, and then my brother Warner, he could see that that was a possibility for him, and he did not shave yet when he left. So that tells you how young he was.
So he was like, what, 16, 15?
Probably 15, 14, yeah, about 15 I would imagine. He didn't shave, just had a little facial hair. And when he came back, he was a muscular, shaving man when he came back. And something else. When my mother, she would find out, because oh my goodness, she missed all those young men. She wondered, are they eating good stuff, and are they eating right? And she'd find out in the paper was listed when the ship would go through the locks in Upper Michigan, between Upper and Lower Michigan. And you could judge by that how many hours it was before they came through St. Clair. So she would fry. First, we had to butcher chicken. Then we'd cut it all up, and she would cook it, fry it, make fresh bread, and put it in a box, and so that it was ready when this ship was going to come through. And we had this car, but at that time we had a Model A T Ford, which had the side curtains on it. And we drove to St. Clair with that box and of food. And right at the park in St. Clair, I forget what it's called. It's still there. There was a little boat that used to take the mail out to the ship going through. So she would take that box over to that ship, that little boat, and ask them if write their name on it, that's who that goes to. And then they would take them a while to get out there. And they'd go along beside the huge ship that was going along till they got just to the right distance, and then they'd get close and go sideways and the ship would have a great big bucket they'd put down on a rope, and that's where this box of food went in, and all the mail that these men might get. Well, by this time she had come back to the car, and she had us all line up in that park. The oldest one first, then the next one, then the littlest one's the last, and we were all supposed to stand and wave until, which we did. And then she'd cry because they were waving over there and we were over here, and we couldn't. And we didn't get in on the crying, but we were waving as far as we could see them. We were supposed to keep waving, and we did. And that was our big outing on Sunday afternoon. We didn't do this very often, but I remember that very vividly. It's one of the things we did.
How did your dad manage the farm when both Werner and Lawrence were gone?
Yeah. Well, then it was the next, I guess it was, I know I had to help. And then Marvin was next in line, so he was the next guy that was, you see, after Warner, it must have been Marvin and Grandpa, and Grandpa Herman, or you know, my father.
Yeah.
So,
how old was Uncle Marv when he went into the Navy? Was he young? Older?
Oh no, he was born. Oh, but Judy was born already. So
oh, okay.
Yeah, so he must have been in his 20s. Yeah, Judy was 2 years old.
Oh.
I remember her, and she did not want to have anything to do with him when he got home. I remember, and he was crushed about that. He had that uniform on, and she wasn't going to go to him at all. But while he was gone, I know, see, while he was gone, his wife Marguerite lived in the house that her parents owned here in Richmond. I don't know what the finances were to that whole thing, but Della stayed with her.
Mm.
And so she might have paid some of the, maybe some of the bills. And because Judy was on the loose there some, you know, I mean, her mother took care of her, but she missed her dad when he first left. And I remember them coming, Charlie's dad he'd play with her, and she loved that. She missed her dad. And she'd crawl up on his lap, and she was, you know, she really missed him. But it didn't take long to forget. And well, I don't think he got to come home either. Once he left, I think he was gone. And it was, see, he left from California, so any leave he might have, he probably didn't even get a leave. See, at that time, when you left, it depended on what time, where the war effort was. At that time, when you got your training, you were sent immediately out. This is after the actual battles were raging. So, because Charlie went in the 9th of February, and in June he was already across. So that was in European theater. So you don't get much time here in the United States.
No, you don't.
No.
What do you remember about Margaret growing up?
Oh, Margaret she was the one that was working in these restaurants around like Swark's Blue Goose Stop when she was 13, 14, clearing off the tables, doing the dirty work, I suppose, emptying garbage and that kind of stuff. But and then she got acquainted with the Schwark's daughter, Loretta. And Loretta was a pretty high-stepping gal. She had her sights set high. She was going to start a beauty shop, and she said, talked Margaret into going in with her. And Loretta had gone and taken some training, but Margaret hadn't. So Loretta made arrangements for Margaret to take the training. It was some man what little he knew about it. And one of the things I remember is that she had a curling iron, and it had wooden handles, and she took it and put it in the chimney of the lamp that made the light, and it would heat it warm, you know.
Well, it didn't have electricity.
No.
Yeah.
And then she'd put it on your hair and turn it all up, and it would kink it up all. And that was a miracle. People had curly hair.
Sizzled the ends.
And that's how she met her husband. That's how she met Dean.
Is it?
Yes, then they started a shop. This is all Loretta's doings. They started a shop in New Baltimore. How that happened, I don't know. Loretta's idea, I guess. And Dean brought coal to deliver to their shop.
Oh.
And he sized up those girls, and he picked out Margaret. And by that time, Loretta had a boyfriend anyway, and so that's how she met Dean. And from then on, they dated. And Margaret was very successful in that business. She kept that up until she gave it up.
Yeah. What was Della like?
Oh, she was another one she always had a job. She always had a job. And one of the first jobs she had was working for some people that Mrs. Brockman's daughter. They had a little tea room out on Gratiot as you go into Mount Clemens. Oh, and I forget what they called it. It was kind of a cute little place. And they served lunches, and you see, people didn't go out to eat the way we did later, but it was mostly lunches you had. And that's where she had that little tea room, and they were only open from 2 to 7 or something like that. And that was her first job. And then she got to work in the Mount Clemens pottery, where they put design on dishes, and she was very good at that. And that paid much better, much better. In between times, she worked at the Medea Hotel, where she was hostess, and that's where I had worked also. And she always had a job. And she worked in the meat market in Richmond afterwards. Then that was at the time she met Owen. They called him Butch. And that from the meat market job is when she went and married him. And that was during the war. Well, the war had started, and then he was gone a long time.
When you were working at the hotel with Della, you stayed with your father's aunt?
It was either an aunt or a cousin. It was somebody, a relative.
What was her name? Do you remember?
That was Mrs. Brockman.
Mrs. Brock.
But I don't remember her first name. She had some man come one night. One man, he was just a neighbor, and it was awful hot night, and Julius, his name was, she kept calling him Julius, and Julius offered to take us, all three of us, out down to Verner's and get some free ginger ale in the Verner's factory. You could drive up there and you got free ginger ale, and it was cold. And he took us, and we all went down there and got our ginger ale and came home. And that was our outing. And she said to us when we got home, "Now you girls remember that I took you when Julius came, and so when you have your boyfriend come, then you must take me with you." Well, we didn't have boyfriends. We never got to take her.
Oh, well. You said that Werner and Marvin were always getting in trouble. What kind of trouble did they get into?
Oh gosh, they could think of more things to do. That was one of the things. Marvin was he always defied the elements. He defied everything. He was going to do whatever he wanted to do. So he's climbing on a gate, between a gate and a fence. Yes, between the gate and the fence were a couple boards across that's made like a ladder. He's climbing on that, up and down, up and down, up and down, and he got to the top and he decided to jump off. Well, it was a lot higher than he thought when he jumped. I don't remember what age he was pretty small when he did it. But he broke both his wrists, and
Wow.
he couldn't feed himself. He couldn't take care of himself. And Della she took him over. See, in a big family, usually the older one was paired up with one of the younger ones that had a problem. And that was her deal at that time. She had to feed him and take care of him.
Take him to the outhouse?
Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
That's right. And he got over that okay. But then they thought up, Warner and he, another game they had. See, that gate that I said that he jumped from there, that led to a pasture, but the pasture was on the other side of a railroad track that went right through the 40 acres on the farm that had the buildings on it where our house was. Well, those boys, they saw things back there that they were going to investigate one evening. And I was tagging along because I didn't have anything better. I didn't have anybody else to play with at that time. And Gordon was a baby, so he had to stay home, but I could tag out. And so I tagged behind him that night. And we got went down to the track, and they start walking down to the right towards this building. And I said, "Where were we going?" And they said, "Well, we just want to look in that building and see what's in that building over there." So they go over to the building, and there was a kind of a lock on it, but it wasn't really locked. And they pushed up on it, and by gosh, the door opened. And here was it was called, they called it a pushy me pulley. And it was a hand car. And one man, they had seen those men do this. They were working on the railroad. And if they had repairs, they'd go from one spot to another with that little machine. So one man would stand on one side and push down on this handlebars. The other man was on the other side, and his handles would go up. So he'd reach way up and pull down, and the other guy's hands would go up. Well, that looked like fun for those two. But how are they going to get that thing out? Well, there was a track going. They got it from the little house off to the side here. They pushed it up to the track. Now they got to get it on the big track. Those two kids did that. They did it.
Wow.
They were determined, they were strong, they were going to do it, and they did it. Now they told me, we're going to take you with us, but don't you ever tell anybody what we did. Now, I was sworn to secrecy, I tell you, and I was scared to death. I don't know what they were going to do, but I was scared, and I held my tongue. I never told anybody that we got on. I was scared to death I got on that thing. And they went fast on that thing. Up and down, up and down, up and down we went, and then I was sure a train was going to come and hit us. It didn't, though. It didn't. It would, but the train ran certain times of the day, and they probably knew that. I didn't. But they brought it back. Somehow they got that thing back in that coop.
Wow.
They never told anybody, never said a thing. I don't know if my parents ever knew that they did that. I never told.
Secret safe with Doris. When you think back, what was the thing that you liked the best about where you grew up and how you grew up?
That I liked the best. Well, I couldn't say we had an unhappy childhood. I mean, everybody lived pretty much the way we lived. Our neighbors, we had plenty of food. We had outdoor. When the weather was nice, we were outdoors all the time. and we learned a lot about the outdoors. We learned about the wildlife, and it was a very enlightening way of life. And there were nice times about it, like sometimes we'd sit on the porch and just listen to the rainfall in the evening, you know. They were very nice times. But it was hard work, but it was rewarding work. And I think we knew a lot. Well, and the other thing was we always had people coming asking. That's why we always had jobs. I remember Margaret and Della, they always had jobs taking care of in people's homes, taking care of children or doing housework, helping the woman with the housework. Even when they were young girls, I mean, 10, 11 years old, on Saturday they'd go and work for somebody. If my mother would spare them. You know, if she had somebody else that she could, another one in line for, which was me sometimes, you know.
The money they earned, were they able to, did they keep it? Did they share it? Did they give it to your mom and dad? What did they do with it
The money?
that they earned?
Well, some of it, you know, a lot of it, I think they used it for their own clothing. I know I did not have a coat, a winter coat that was from a store until I saved my money and bought it. And my mother always made, my clothes were always hand-me-downs from somebody else, and she would take the garment, take it all apart, wash it, turn the other side of the fabric to the outside so it looked new, and I think I was well dressed. At least the other kids had the same thing.
You didn't feel out of place, which
No.
is really good. Yeah.
No. And Margaret always kept my hair cut. She practiced on me. And so that was nice. And that was another thing. And then one of my mother's sisters, my aunt Gusty worked for some people in Detroit. And when she had a day off, Aunt Gusty, she'd come on the Blue Goose. She'd come out to the Blue Goose stop, and she would come to walk down the road to our house. And because at that time, my grandmother was living with us then, and she'd always bring, those people were quite well-to-do. They were, anything they had to give away, she would bring. So my mother could make nice things out of what she brought for us. So we always felt that we were quite privileged that way.
And that was before she married.
Yes, a long time. And she was not married until she was almost 40. Yeah. And then she had 3 children, so, and that was a very hard thing. She gave out a lot. She had beautiful clothes, too, when she was coming. I remember her being very well dressed when she came.
That's totally different than the way it ended up, isn't it?
Yes, yes. Yeah.
What about Gordon? What can you remember about Bud?
Well, I always remember he always had a dog, and he'd always coax an extra one to come home with him. and I'd try to get him to play dolls with me, and he wasn't much on playing dolls, but for some reason, somehow or other, and I can't figure out how, we got a black doll. And that was unusual, probably because it was cheap. And because he was small when he had that. And if I remember correctly, it was a boy. It had boys' clothes on it. And, but he wasn't much on playing with dolls, so I didn't get much play time with him. But, and he had a bicycle. And his big thing when he got the bicycle, and I don't know how he got the bicycle. Now that might have been something that maybe one of the older ones bought for him, maybe, because none of the rest of us had a 2-wheel bike. So he was one of the younger ones, see. And he'd try to get that bicycle stuck in the mud and see if he could get it out without... just by sitting on the seat and pushing on the pedals. And sometimes he'd have it mired right down to the pedals, so they'd all be in there. Then he'd come home and he'd have mud on his shoes and everything. Mother said, what have you been doing? Oh, nothing, I was just out playing.
I have a picture of him on his bike with Carl.
Really?
On the back of it, yeah. And Carl's pretty young. My dad wasn't real old, maybe, like 13 or so. So
Well,
Uncle
that
Carl
was pretty big to have a bike, though.
I'm just guessing because he was not big. He was not big, and Uncle Carl was quite small because there was 7 years difference between them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm surprised.
Yeah. I think I got that from Della, from Aunt Della.
Probably, because I have not seen that.
Yeah, that's cool. What was, so by the time Carl came around, you're 9 years older than him.
Oh my gosh.
So things must have been a lot different by the time he came around.
Oh gosh, I had no idea. I came home from school one day and it was so quiet in the house. And my mother, I kept, anybody home? And pretty soon my Aunt Gusty Bauer, who never was at our house in the daytime, she came out and she said, shh. And I thought, what happened? What happened? Oh, just a minute, she said. And she goes into the bedroom and comes out carrying a pillow. with her arms out with a pillow on it. And I had to stand up on my tiptoe to see what's this pillow about. And I stand up on my tiptoe, and she says, "You want to see your little brother?" And I said, "I don't want a brother. I got a brother." And she laughed. She thought that was funny, but I meant it.
I got a lot of brothers.
Yeah. I had 4 already. Here's the 5th one.
That's right.
I did not have a clue that there was going to be a brother and baby there. Never a clue. No preparation whatsoever. Things were different. And I was big enough to know. I was 9 years old. I had a friend who lived on a school, and she and I always paired up. Her name was Esther Bellhorn, and she came from a big family. There were 10 in their family. We only had 8. They had 10. But her father worked for a Weeks packing plant, and so he had a good paying job, but they had a farm besides, and so the older boys in that family they kept the farm running besides the father having. And so the next day, after me seeing this pillow with a baby on it, I had to tell her that I had a new brother, And she's, "Oh, I know all about that. I had one like that one day." She says, "Come at my house one day." But, I mean, that was the extent of our education.
What was Carl like as a little boy? Was he friendly? Was he shy? Was he...
Oh, no, he was very
What
friendly.
was he like?
I used to tell him stories, but I did something I know now that was really bad. I used to scare him and tell him that his mother was going to run away. And I remember doing that. And he said, "No, I don't want her to go away." And
Why did you do that?
I don't know why. I just wanted to hear him cry and beg, I guess.
We do have a mean streak in us,
I
don't we?
guess so. But and that was one of the things I should have told you, too, about when that fire, the time the barn burned. At that time, nobody paid any attention to him. He was sleeping in the house.
Well, he was only 4 or so.
He was little.
Yeah.
And when he finally got up and came out, he was shivering, just shivering. And somebody, I don't know, we don't know who did it. It was a neighbor or who found a great big T-shirt belonged to one of the bigger kids and put it on him because they thought he was cold. And it was because he was traumatized. He knew something horrible had happened. He didn't know what. And then, of course, my mother picked him up and carried him and talked to him. And, that was her anchor for the time being. But he wouldn't go to a stranger, but he was friendly. He started, I don't remember if he went to that school. Not too long ago, somebody asked me to identify people in a picture of the whole school, St. Peter's. And Gordon was in it. And he had just started school. And he was in the front row. I could tell it was him. And that Billy Bellhorn, that Esther, he was sitting next to Gordon. They were friends. But those people were quite friendly neighbors with us. those young people and our young people were pretty much the same ages, and we understood each other.
Did any of your brothers like to hunt?
I don't think there was much hunting done. No, I don't think so. I think we had our own chickens we killed, and so forth. And yes, that brings to memory something. At that time, when about in the 30s, early 30s, people were buying cottages along St. Clair River in St. Clair. They'd go and spend the weekend at their cottage, like the banker or the business people in town. So my parents, living right on this road going to St. Clair, my mother got the idea. The eggs was her money, grocery money, and if we could sell chickens cut up for sale, that they probably would sell. So she put a sign out, a whole chicken for $2, and they order, and so few people started stopping, and they'd say, next week I'd like 2 on Saturday. I'll pick up 2 on Saturday. And so, okay, she'd write it on the calendar, and so then we had to have that ready. So we all learned how to take the pin feathers out of the chicken and cut up the chicken in pieces, and we learned that because we were in on the work part of it. So one day one of the older, probably the one that was just got the driver's license, said they were going town. Did she want to go? And she said, yes, I do. I need some things. And this is staples only that she'd buy in the store. And but she is baking bread, and she said to me, now you stand right there by that stove, and when you put your hand in there, and I had to feel and look. And I had to look at the bread, and it had to be brown on top. So okay, so I looked, and then I could take the bread out, because she might not be back on time. So I took the bread out and put it along there, and here the car stops, and here's the man after his chickens. So I gave him, I knew what to do with that, because she had the price marked on it and everything. And he says, how much for that bread? I didn't know what to tell him. And I said, well, 50 cents a loaf. Okay, I'd like a loaf of bread too. So I gave him a loaf of bread. And they emptied it out of the tin. And so not long later, she came back, and she come in, and she looks over there, and she says, what happened to the bread? I said, I sold it. And she said, to who? And I said, well, that Mr. Lutz, he wanted to buy it, and she said, how much did you get for it? I said, well, I didn't know. I said 50 cents. And she said, oh my gosh, you could have sold it all.
Good price.
I guess I had no idea. I don't know how old I was. That was my big first sale of bread.
Here you are, the entrepreneur.
I guess. Oh, goodness. That was part of growing up on a farm. Yeah.
That's really cool.
But as I say, it was there were nice things about it too. Nice things and not so nice things.
Yeah. What was the thing you disliked the most about being on the farm?
The
or whatever?
outside toilet.
Oh yeah.
Oh my goodness, we
Is
never
it
did have
one outhouse with one port,
2 holes.
2 holes. Well, that's good.
One was smaller than the other for the little kids.
Was it any lower to the? It wasn't any lower to the ground. So
No, but you
still
had
had to
a-
get yourself up there.
Yeah, we had something to step on. And you know, too, it sounds awful, but you put lye in the, you know, when the weather gets hot and stuff, you put lye in there, and it's not so bad. I mean, you can keep the smell down, and you can keep the keep it so it's not too. Well, there's another thing that I should tell you about is we had a cistern outside the house. And a cistern is something where the water comes off the roof and runs down into a tank.
Mm-hmm.
And to get the water out of that, you had to put a pump on it, or you had to dip it out.
Mm-hmm.
And that was nice, soft water, see, because it was rainwater.
Mm-hmm.
And we'd love to wash our hair in that.
Mm-hmm.
And then we'd get a bucket of water and take it in the house and heat some, and that made wonderful shampoo. Yeah.
Makes your hair softer too.
It did, and we learned put a little vinegar in the water.
Oh yeah.
And I was always a kind of a dishwater blonde. They called it dishwater blonde, but as I got older, it got more auburn color in it.
Mm-hmm.
And I'd put a little cider vinegar in it, which is darker, and it would make it a pretty color. So Margaret told me, anyway. She was the expert. I did have pretty hair. It was heavy, but that was a dislike thing. My mother had strips of cloth that she'd wind it up in on Saturday night. And then on Sunday morning, she'd take those strips of cloth out, and some hair would always get caught in it and pull out, and it would kind of hurt. And of course, I made more of it than I probably would. Really wasn't so bad, but I'd yell and make noises. And but it was pretty, and it would make long curls, you know, when you took all those strips out. That was my Sunday going to meeting out.
Wow.
White socks. White stockings that went up over the knee. Sometimes they weren't real dry. I put them on, and I didn't like that either. That wasn't comfortable. But that was, if you didn't have a hot fire, you didn't get dry socks.
Did you go to church on Sundays?
Always. Always. You had to have all your clothes out on Saturday night, ready to put on Sunday morning, too. I don't have time to wait to look for anything on Sunday morning. You have that already on Saturday night. And somebody had the shoe polishing detail. We took turns doing that. Usually one of the younger kids would get stuck with that. And you might have to do it a couple of times, too, before it was done right.
What can you tell me about your grandmother, your mother's mother?
Well, she lived with us part-time. And see, she'd go from one to the other. I don't know if she wore out her welcome or what the deal was, why she moved around, but she did. And you see, we never had extra room. And we never did. Well, at one time, I had to sleep with her, and I didn't like that. I didn't, because I know I wasn't supposed to wiggle at night in bed with her. I suppose my mother told me that. Don't move around, it'll bother her or something. And she would talk to me. I had to comb her hair and brush it in the morning, and I also learned to make a twist on the back, a pug, and put hairpins in it so it would stay on her neck in the back. And she talked to me while I was doing that. And one of the things she told me was that she missed about the old country. She always called it the old country, where she came from, was the men singing. And also that there were beautiful church bells, and they would ring when it was time for church.
Don't do that.
Okay. And she said it makes the prettiest sound on Sunday morning. And then in the afternoon, after church was out and people went back and ate, everybody'd go for a walk in the afternoon, and then they'd all converse and talk about what their crops are doing or what they're doing and so forth. She missed that, and I could see that.
When I went to Germany to visit my brother in the 80s, late 70s and into the middle 80s, they still did that in Germany.
Did they?
Yeah, it was that's what you do on Sunday mornings or Sunday afternoons. You get together and you go for walks.
Yeah. And I remember, too, hearing that when we were over there, and it kind of reconnected me with her, and I thought, now I know what she meant about that. At the time, I thought, I have to do all these things for her, and she's always unhappy. I wonder why she's so unhappy, see? And it was because of the things she missed. And it's a beautiful country over there, too.
What did she do that made you think she was unhappy? She just said she was unhappy,
Right.
or
She appeared unhappy, and she never had anything, no handwork, no reading, nothing. She sat. Her hands were clenched. Her hands were closed. She couldn't, I don't know if it happened from a stroke or if it was because of arthritis. You know, I don't know that. But they were just like, she couldn't put her own shawl around her, you know. She didn't have the use of her fingers.
how did she eat?
Well, we put the spoon in there and give it to her.
She could do that. You didn't have to feed her.
No. But, and we were careful about giving her what food. It was always cut up, and so her teeth, she didn't have all her teeth, I don't think, either. So that was probably another reason that her food needed special attention, because that was my job. I had, I didn't have the younger one to take care of because my mother was taking care of that. I was taking care of her.
Yeah. Can you remember hearing any stories about your dad's parents?
No, he never taught, and I always felt I missed something by not knowing a grandfather. I never knew a grandfather on either side. And I always thought, I wonder what they were like. Until I talked with Irene Bauer Schultz, a cousin, and we were all grandmothers at that time. And I told her, I said, I always felt I missed something by not knowing my grandfather. And she said, Oh, you wouldn't want to know Grandpa Krause. She said he had a red beard and he had those piercing Krause eyes. She said, I was scared to death of him. So I don't, that was her vision of him.
But she didn't. She didn't say he yelled or anything.
No.
It was just he had a red beard and blue eyes.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And she was scared of him, she said. She did say, you know, those old German men, they did not take to children kindly, is what she said. They were not playful with children.
Wow. Yeah. Yeah. Wow. That's really cool. I think we should cut for lunch. What do you say?
Yeah, I think it's a good idea.